So you have a business idea and you're ready to work on it, but how do you know if it's worth pursuing it in the first place? On the contrary to what most people think, you should not start with building an MVP. Instead, if you have watched the intro of this 5-video mini-series, you know that I have talked about the roadmap which experienced entrepreneurs use to go from an idea to their first customers in the most effective way possible. Now, I specifically talked about why it is so crucial to focus on first validating if your idea is worth pursuing before moving on to building out your first version of your product. So welcome to the first step of this series, and today we will discuss about why you should actually not start with building your MVP and how to validate your idea following a simple 3-step framework. And I will be giving you the tools you need to make this happen in the cheapest and most effective way. Now, by the end of this video, I want you to leave with tangible and actionable insights instead of just theory from the books. Actionable business lessons that I have learned from building my own tech startup to over $500,000 in sales. So why should you not start with building out an MVP, or in other words, your first version of your product? Well, the MVP term is very overloaded and there are actually many definitions. Some say it is the first version of a working product, and others say that it's anything that helps you learn from customers. Well, for this series, we will stick to defining an MVP as a first version of an actual working product. And the risk of starting immediately to build an MVP is actually very simple. It's what I like to call the one more feature trap, leading to actual overdevelopment. Now, the problem with starting right away to build an MVP is pretty simple. The entry barrier became very low, and half-baked offers doesn't necessarily mean that you will get early users. Instead, in today's age, it became much simpler to build out a tech product compared to 10 years ago. And customers have a lot more choices, and if your product doesn't deliver immediately, they might just simply switch to something else that works today and won't wait for months for yours to work. This will cause you to believe that your product doesn't work, leading you to keep wanting to iterate and change and add new features in hopes that you will find this one feature that will actually get you the customers and will actually get you the revenue. Now, the result of this is that you start building out a product that nobody needs in the first place, which is at the same time the biggest reason why products fail. And believe me when I say this, this will lead you to waste a lot of time and a lot of money. So the question you should ask yourself is there another way? And there actually is. And the solution to this is that you need to pre-sell your idea before building it. And in order to do this effectively, you need to understand your customer's problem better than they do. You need to talk to as many customers as possible before building out your product. But to talk to customers, you need some kind of offer to get their attention. Well, in the next step, I'm going to show you how to do all of that in 3 simple steps, and I will be giving you everything you need to execute it. So how do you pre-sell your idea before building it? And in order to do that effectively, we need to have a look at this 3-step framework. So let's start off with the first point, which is understanding the problem you're trying to solve better than your actual customers. In order to do that, you need to do some research. And in order to execute that research properly, I would start with 3 points. First, create a list of problems that you are trying to solve. Second, define your target customer. And third, list alternative solutions. So how do you actually do this? Well, how I approached it at the very beginning is that I went onto a whiteboard tool and I created a board, I labeled it problems, and I started researching on the internet. And everything you can find that is useful, you can start pulling into this board. And as you can see, I connected it specifically to different sections of the whiteboard that I created, which I will show you in a second what to do exactly or how to do it exactly. Now, once you have done this and you created this setup, you basically create 3 different cards. The first one is, like I said, you define the problems and you create a list of problems. So you start off by listing problem number 1, problem number 2, problem number 3. Then you go ahead and you define your target customer. How do you do that? Well, you focus on those 2 simple questions. Who are they and where are they hanging around? Because this specific question you will also need at a later stage, but I will get to that in a second. And as a third point, you list alternative solutions by asking yourself, who are your customers using today? And for all of this, to execute this properly, I will give you some tools and resources. Well, to start off, what I used here, a whiteboard tool, was Miro, but you can use any other whiteboard tool if you have a preference. Well, I would highly recommend as well to use AI in order to assist you with your research. Obviously, you can double check and verify the information that the AI spits out, but it will drastically speed up the process. Now, I would also highly recommend that you read this article about jobs to be done by Tony Olvik. Just go ahead and read it or stop the video and screenshot it, but this will help you to define your target customer or have a different perspective on it. Then there is a book that might also help you at this stage, which is called the MOM test. How to talk to customers and learn if your business is a good idea when everyone is lying to you. Now for tips like this, I created a specific email list, as I cannot always, whenever I find a new tool or new resource, a new article, I cannot just simply create an entire video on it because it's just simply not enough content, but I can share them with my email list. So feel free to use the link below to sign up and to receive more tips like this. Now let's move on to the second step, which is designing your solution. And for this, we will create an offer. An offer consists basically out of three things. First, your unique value proposition, or in short, UVP, which basically means, or you focus on, what makes your solution actually different from alternatives. Then you have your value proposition, which is how do you actually solve the problem? And you have the pricing, which how much does it cost and how do you charge your customer? Is it a subscription? Is it a one-time payment, etc., etc.? So basically, once you start researching about that and work on this, you will go back to your whiteboard tool or Miro board, whatever tool you like to use, and you create a different section labeled as solution. You create 3 different cards, the ones I just mentioned, unique value proposition, or you can also call it unique selling proposition, and the pricing. You will focus on those specific questions and you will work on this. Note it down, as you will need to have this information at a later stage as well. So it's very important to store it in a tool of your choice, which I will recommend definitely to use a whiteboard tool and connect any kind of research that you find online to that tool. Let's have a look at real life examples to give you a better picture about how it works. So essentially Buffer, which is a pretty successful company, that's how they started out their very first offer. They created a 2-pager and they had their offer statement, which was tweet more consistently with Buffer. They had some benefits and they had a button, which was plans and pricing. Once users clicked on plans and pricing, they just basically said, oh, you called us before we are ready, submit your email. That is not too bad. And this kind of helps you validate if your offer is good and you will have potential customers in the future. But they only had 2 of the 3 points I just mentioned. They had their unique value proposition. They had their overall how do you solve the problem, which is the value proposition, but they had no pricing. In the next variation of their offer, they actually created a 3rd page, which they added a page into the middle. Now they followed all 3 points that I just mentioned before. They had the same first pager. Once people clicked on plans and pricing, they actually showed 3 different pricing models. And once those people clicked on one of these pricings, then they would be able to submit the email. That way, they could really verify if they would, at a later stage, work on the actual product. Now, there's a different example that illustrates pretty well how to create your first offer and validate if your idea is worth pursuing in the first place. So there is the founder of Zappos.com, which is basically now a store that sells various types of shoes. And in order to validate his idea, Nick went to a physical shoe store and actually photographed those shoes. He then uploaded the photos to a simple website, and as soon as someone clicked the button to buy a pair, Nick went down to the store, bought the shoes, and actually shipped it to the customer. Now the company went on to do very, very well and was sold to Amazon in 2009 for 1.2 billion. I think this is a pretty good illustration as well. Now let's have a look at the tools and resources you can use in order to create your own offer. Now obviously this is not always applicable for every single one or every single idea, but I would say you can, if you just take the very simple steps and the very first steps. A lot of you want to build a landing page and a lot of you want to buy a domain. So in order to buy a domain, you can use a website like namecheap.com or any other website that sells domains. And in order to create your landing page, there are many tools out there, but I can recommend you to use framer.com, which they have their own marketplace. Like I said, many others do as well. But I think that templates that they have for free are pretty solid in order to start off building kind of an offer page for yourself. And on that page, you will have the possibility to build a form as well that you can connect to Google Sheet, for example, in the background to keep things simple in the beginning and collect email addresses to see if there is any kind of interest. Now, the problem is that most people stop right here. after having created your first offer and landing page, people won't just magically appear out of nowhere to sign up to buy the solution that you're trying to provide, which is why you need to focus on step 3, which is testing your offer. In other words, you need to bring eyeballs to your offer to actually see if there are even people out there that need a solution for the problems you're trying to solve. And in order to do this properly, you need to do customer discovery. Now, in order to do customer discovery properly, you need to talk to real customers, actually real conversations with your target customer. Now, how do you do that? Well, you use outreach methods like email, cold calling, or social media by DMing, posting, or even joining groups where your target customer is hanging around. Well, you could also bring eyeballs through ads, but this is not a cheap or low-cost solution. Now, how do you actually execute this? What do you need to focus on first? Well, there are several points. First, you need to find your customer's information. And of course, this depends heavily on the business idea and the problem you're trying to solve. But most of the time, you focus on having either an email address, a phone number, or potentially their social media account or name. Then you gotta find a place where you start to organize whatever you find and have a clear organization and storage of that information. Usually you use a CRM, in other words, a customer relationship management software. You set up a short email, DM message, call, script, or post in the group referring back to your offer, which usually can be in form of a PDF or the landing page you just created in step 2. What I would always suggest whenever you try to do this kind of things, that you try to track the most important 3 metrics, which is who opens your message, which in social media, most of the time you can see this by having a scene under your message, and using email, you can use different tools that I will just give you in a second. Then tracking link clicks. So let's assume you created a landing page, then you can track how many people actually saw your message and then how many people actually clicked on the link to visit your landing page. And then it's very simple, conversion calls or conversions, which in this case, I highly recommend that a conversion is considered a call, a conversation, and not an actual sale, because remember, at this stage you should not sell, but you should discover, you should learn, and should be getting feedback from the market and not even think about right now to make a lot of money, because remember, going back to the very first and most crucial point is you need to understand your customer's problem better than they do. And you don't do this by right away selling, because you might focus on problems that are just at the moment not worth solving, and you need to adapt those, or you need to adapt your research first. Now let's have a look at examples. Let's take Lemlist for example. What is Lemlist? Basically, it's an email outreach tool or marketing platform that is operating in a market or started in a market full of competitors. Now Lemlist's or Guillaume's unique value proposition was very simple: focus on personalization. And I can remember this pretty well because I was a very early user of that platform, and what I liked so much back then was very simple. The platform allowed me to use this simple image that you see right here, which is actually a photo of Guillaume himself, where I could use this cup and reach out to 50 people and automatically put their first name onto one of the cups, and on the other cup you could see my name. Back then this was not very common for email outreaching platforms, and so this was a very clear UVP. Now the interesting part is that Lemlist is obviously a software tool, but Guillaume actually got his first customers by only doing outbound outreach and live demo calls. And he offered his customers to write the email campaigns for them. So he combined technology with service first. Now, obviously, this is a step a little bit further down the line, and for the next video where I actually show you how to build an MVP, but you can basically replace having live demos with having conversations with people and asking specific questions to figure out if they even have the problem you think they have, that your target customer has. So that's what you should do at this stage. Now, the tools and resources you can use is Google Workspace, because you can set up a professional email. Remember, in the other step, you basically bought a domain. Now you have the possibility to have a professional email using that specific domain. MailTrack is actually an extension. You can use many other tools again. It's just a recommendation because they have a feature that is pretty much free, and MailTrack will allow you to track at least the open rates. Now you have to explore for other tools or paid versions most of the time to track link tracks. Now for the CRM or customer relationship management software, you can use things like Airtable or HubSpot. I would potentially recommend you to start off with Airtable, as it kind of works like an Excel sheet, and many people out there are used to at least work in kind of Excel, and it's basically Excel on steroids, and it has very good templates, even though it's not a fundamental CRM tool. But for the beginning, to keep things easy and cheap, you might be able to use Airtable, as this one might come handy for other things as well in the future. It's crucial to understand that all of those 3 steps are actually an iterative process, and your goal will always be learning and ultimately understanding the customer's problem better than they do. And you are looking for signs of intent to buy and not for an actual sale. However, it will not always be the case that it's linear and very simple to execute one step one by one. You might actually start off with the research and have some ideas about the problems you want to solve. You might want to create an offer, but potentially here you will not get anyone to talk to you. And that's already considered a very first feedback. So you might need to go back to research and refine what we have worked on, to then refine your offer again and then try to get to talk to people. Once you have talked to your very first customer or target customer, you will be able to ask very crucial questions. And in those questions, you will be able to learn further and understand which problems to focus on, which will ultimately help you to refine and understand who your target customers are and pinpoint problems to focus on from the list that you have created in step 1. From there, you will be able to create a killer offer, and from there, you will be able to talk to more and more customers to gather more and more information. So as you can see, it's a very iterative process like this, and your core goal should actually be to at some point have talked to 20 to 50 customers in order to be very sure that you are validating more and more if your idea or business idea is even worth pursuing in the first place, before moving on to the second step, which I will cover in the next video of this series, creating an actual product and investing money and time into it. And you will quickly see that once you start to talk to customers, you will need to focus on asking the right questions. And your main goal will be to validate problems and your assumptions, to confirm that the problem is even worth solving in the first place. And you should at all costs trying to understand the buying process as well. You should figure out pain points and overall evaluate your list of problems. How painful is the problem? How often does the problem have to be solved? And is there really no solution for this problem? Now, in order to execute this iterative process properly, I would recommend you to go back again to your Miro board, and at all times and every single stage, collect as much info and feedback from the market as you can. And during your customer discovery or customer interviews, you will be focusing quite a lot on validating problems, your assumptions, confirming that the problem is even worth solving, and you want to understand the buying process of your target customers. So obviously, if it's B2B, they might need to talk to other people in that organization. You want to note those kind of things down. If it's B2C, I don't know, as a little joke, now they might talk to their wife first before buying your product. But you get the point. You need to really understand as much as you can from your customers and as much as you can from the problem. You want to figure out the pain points, and you want to overall evaluate the problems. So how painful is the problem that you had on your list? How often does the problem needs to be solved? Now, you also want to figure out if there is really no solution for this problem. I will give you an example. Let's say you reach out to a B2B, a company, whatever, and they give you a response that they are already using a solution. So this is where you start hitting roadblocks, and you need to use those roadblocks to collect feedback as much as possible. So you need to try to communicate with those people, even though if it's not on the call, you need to reply, let's say, to that message and ask, who is it? What needs to be done for you to potentially be considered as well as a solution? Things like this. You really want to be a detective. You really want to turn every stone you can find. You really want to use every single roadblock for a period of time to really dig deeper, to really try to get feedback and to really try to learn more. And that's how you really figure out the pain points, and you figure out overall, is your idea even worth pursuing? Is it even worth putting more time? Is it even worth putting or investing more money into the business idea you are just trying to create in the first place? And you will quickly see that overall, at all times, you need to have a place where you store information. So in that case, it can be your Miro board, can be your whiteboard tool, whatever. And I would at all costs, whenever you have the chance to talk to real customers, evaluate answers, record calls, obviously ask for their permission, and use an AI note taker to help you create summaries, and potentially use AI at a later stage as an assistant to notice patterns that you potentially have not seen with your eye yet. Overall, you will quickly understand if this idea that you are trying to work on is even worth pursuing, and if it's worth to put more money and more time into this, or if you are just building something where the market is clearly telling you there is just no need for that. Or is it somewhat something that you are getting amazing feedback after a few iterations and you're starting to notice, oh man, I really have something here and I need to really focus even more and work even more, put more time, put more money into this, and start really building your first version of your product, which is the MVP, which I will cover in the next video of this series. Now, this is, to be honest, also a very big mistake that we did at the very beginning, which is why I'm here and really re-emphasizing on every single point, because I really want to drive that point home. Because what we did is that we did obviously some research. We created an offer and began building an MVP right away. The problem of this is that along the way, we started noticing that we actually didn't execute the customer discovery properly. We didn't even talk enough to customers because of the simple reason that we really started to notice that we skipped a very crucial part of the process, which was step number 3, testing the offer, having a lot of customer discovery calls and talking to people, which resulted in many wasted hours of work and resources, and led us to go back to rebuilding that MVP at a later stage because we just had new insights at some point. So it's very crucial that you don't do this wrong, and you really don't try to cut a corner and go very fast to the market. You really want to make sure you, at every single step of the way, you collect the right information, right insights, you learn from it, and you take your time to do this properly. Obviously, you won't do this for an entire year, as I covered as well in the intro, but you really don't want to cut corners on this, because otherwise you just simply risk to waste a lot of your time, a lot of money, and you will need to go back to that, to the fundamental 3 steps, which are, like I said, understand the problem, design a solution, and test the offer. Do research, create an offer, and do customer discoveries. You should at all costs talk to real customers before you even build the product, before you even invest money. Now, like I promised as well in the intro of this mini series, I told you I would give you a little bit of a few legal tips. So I would probably at this stage hold off with creating a company. Why? Because many people forget, but creating a company costs money. Even if you create one of these companies that you have, for example, now in Europe, where you sometimes you can create a company with €1, even then you will be at some point in need of accounting services and you will need to pay money for that. So in order to keep it cost effective, I would hold off for now and avoid these costs until you really start making your first sales. Now, I'm not sure how it is in the US, but some countries in Europe, for example, have something that is called a minimum revenue threshold that you need to hit in order to be obliged to create an official registered company. But obviously, I'm not a legal advisor, so really check this with a person that is qualified to give you advice on this. But I would really take that time to spend learning about your target customers instead of getting bogged down on paperwork and focus too much on creating a company, whereas you don't even know in the first place if you are going to keep doing this for the long run, because you have not explored yet what the market is telling you about your idea that you are trying to create or your business idea. Now, there are some compliance considerations. Obviously, if you create a landing page where you're collecting a bunch of information, personal personal information, names, email addresses, phone numbers, whatever it might be. Just pay attention to potentially focus on a little bit on being compliant, so you can use AI for that, or many tools, like also the one I suggested you use to build your landing page has many integrations with kind of third-party tools that then allow you to automatically integrate kind of a basic consent pop-ups for cookies and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, I would not now spend 3 weeks on drafting a cookie policy or terms and conditions, but just check with AI or legal qualified person and ask what you need to pay attention to. Just don't spend too much time on this. Just be aware of it and quickly set something up that you are compliant. For now, it's all you gotta do until you start becoming more and more serious at a later stage when you start doing sales, etc., and building out a product, and afterwards also incorporating your company. So for now, don't waste too much time. Really focus on understanding the market, your customer, and understanding the problem better than your own target customer, to understand as well if your business idea is worth pursuing in the first place. Feel free to watch the next video of this mini series where I will show you exactly how to build out your first minimal viable product. And in case by the time you're watching this it is still not released, feel free to drop all your questions down below in the comments. Thanks for watching.